All right, we are back with another Future of Church where we are living at the intersection of technology, faith, culture, all sorts of stuff. I am Christopher.
And I'm
Perfect time to take a drink.
I'm Joe.
Yes. I didn't know if you were actually going to do it.
I was debating.
Great. I know. No, that was good. Well, so for all of you listening, watching today, we're going to be kind of mixing a couple things together. So we were talking backstage and where this one was really inspired by some of the recent misinformation or actually AI generated information that has caused some serious damage in some people's lives recently. And just kind of talking about how technology is changing the way media is created, media is shared, things like that. But then really getting to the practical application of like, what do we do in response to this as believers? Because the answers to this, I personally think, are maybe hard in execution because it's like it goes against our nature, but they're actually more practical and simple than some might think. So I'm looking forward to it. Let's see. So I'll share the two stories that came across my desk that kind of inspired this. And I'm just kind of curious, like your initial reactions to it. But so one was a couple of weeks ago. There was a I don't know, athletic coach or something like this. The principal had made him super mad. And so he went out, he created an AI generated version of his voice and then had basically made an audio clip of this principal saying a bunch of really racist, hateful things and blew it up all over social media, only to have it come out later after a lot of the damage had been done that the whole thing was fake. And the guy ended up going to jail for doing this whole thing. But unfortunately, the damage was done. Well, now there's a lawsuit happening with Microsoft for a gentleman who AI created an article. I don't know how or why or whatever, but completely made up that he was convicted of sexual something, he was mischievous something. He ended up getting convicted of it and it ended up hitting MSNBC and all over the place. And the whole thing, complete fake. And so now he's suing them over this and they're trying to figure out how it all happened. But to me, it was just a reminder of how so much of the stuff we consume, we really can't trust that it's real with how easy technology has made it to create information. And then on top of it, now with AI, I mean, you might literally see a video of somebody doing something that is 100% artificial, like literally nothing to it. And it's so easy to do. I know because I've got the software to do it. And I could teach my kids to do it if I wanted to. So anyway, your kind of thoughts, reactions. I'm not going to teach my kids to do it, but I mean, it's one of those things where it's a little scary. I mean, in some ways to be like, man, is what we're seeing even real anymore? We're moving into the age of misinformation.
Yeah. And when you said that you have the software to do it, and I was expecting, for some reason, my brain completed as, and I've already done it. Even though, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, threw my own self off with that comment. One of the other things we talked about before coming on air, is that the on pod?
Sure, whatever.
I don't know.
Before we hit record.
Yeah, there you go. Building my vocabulary back up from scratch.
Yeah.
Was the idea that this is, and if anyone's heard like 2 episodes of ours, this will be familiar. It's not new.
No,
the idea of misinformation, and it's not new. The idea that we need to be discerning about what information is fed to us, where we get it, what's your source. I had during COVID, I had someone who sent an article that was related to something that was purported to be going on in Israel at the time, related to COVID and vaccines and stuff. And I said, dude, do you see who put this content out? This is a heavily anti-Semitic site. And by the way, they have another article that contradicts this one. And if everything was just as obvious as that,
yeah,
that would be awesome. Be
Well, and
like,
I think that's the thing is it
that source.
harder and harder to be like, it's obvious.
Right.
Getting
Right.
harder and harder to be able to tell, "Oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is coming from this," or this is it's like
Yeah. And you really do. You kind of you have a choice between three options. Two of them are super easy, unfortunately, and one's to just believe everything and then, wait to see if someone disproves it, and if they don't, you get to be right. The other option is to go the opposite direction where
you don't
you
believe anything.
believe nothing,
Right.
and you're a skeptic about everything, including fact checking things. Like, I love that when someone on my friends list posts something that's like, I hope this one gets to go, the fact checking stuff keeps taking my stuff down. It's like, probably not a vast conspiracy against you
Right.
specifically.
Well,
But
and the thing going back to some of the like stuff behind it, I don't think unless you're really involved with the technology,
yeah.
I understand culturally we've made this dramatic shift where
Yeah.
like media, news information came from certain institutions, and it's not that those institutions were ever like altruistic,
Right.
but the way it worked was you had to cater to the masses. Catering
Mhm.
to the fringe wasn't terribly profitable. And so there just was less of this like fringe stuff that could go
Yeah.
viral and all this other stuff because, well, there just wasn't easy ways to create it. You couldn't really gain an audience in a certain way. Now you can be bonkers crazy and with a couple SaaS tools have a whole media outlet around you that looks legitimate, like a completely legitimate
Yeah.
media thing. And you're just sitting in your house. And I think sometimes people, especially if you just are not familiar with the tech, you don't realize that. And so you see
Yeah.
this stuff and it looks really legitimate. And it's like, well, wow, like they've got the whole newscast thing and there's a thing streaming past them and they've
Yeah.
got different people coming in and out of the feed. It seems very legitimate. And I think that is
Yeah.
hard for people who have not adjusted to how this can be. And in some ways, I think it's been good. I mean, I
Mhm.
think people being able to bring things up that before would have never made,
Yeah.
headlines. I think that's good, but we're in a weird spot.
Yeah. Yeah. And that kind of brings us to that third option, which is the hard one, is like having conversations with people
Yeah,
and allowing those conversations to unfold in before jumping to a conclusion. Because that one thing we talk about when you talk about people, not just circumstances or things,
sure.
it's easy to hear about someone you think that person could never,
Right.
and that's the end of it. Like, because they could never in your mind, they must not have, and so
Or
they're
the
all right.
opposite.
you
Or
know
the opposite. Be like,
and
oh yeah,
yeah,
that person, they totally would do
yeah,
that type of a thing.
dude's super shady. And instead, like, we have to understand that, as it was put on a post I was talking about earlier, it's just like, people are complex beings. We have there's probably things I do that people think are great, and things that I do that people think are just like, what
And
is
they
that,
might be the same thing.
out of
It
his
might be the
mind?
same thing, but two
Oh,
different
yeah,
categories
I
of
suppose
people
that's
might
true.
feel polar opposite about that exact same thing.
Right. And I'm sure I'll do something horrible, that, at least in my children's eyes, at some point, and we'll have to figure that out as people. But uh, the story that came to mind, that I shared with you earlier when we were first kind of processing this topic, I'll share for everyone. Is, at our church, we're going through a series of related to the fruits of the spirit, or the fruit of the spirit, because it's presented in the singular. And it's hard not to just say fruits, because there's more than one thing in the list. But but the one we were covering was kindness. And a gentleman from the church approached me afterwards and said that the sermon reminded him of an event. So in our church, I, as the elder chairman, oversee our our membership meetings, and the lead pastor was there, and this gentleman had made some comments that made a lot of people go, I don't. That's an inside thought. Keep that inside.
Keep that one in your head.
Yeah. And so we invited him to have a conversation, and he was initially you could tell he was kind of defensive, at the front end of it. Who wouldn't be? And but he remembers that meeting as being an instance where he was shown a lot of kindness because we just asked questions. We set some context. Hey, this is how people received this. What were you trying to communicate? Like, what were you trying to say? What were you trying to, like, what was, and really digging in and asking questions and then saying, okay, we hear you. We hear your heart now. Here's maybe a more productive way to say that in the future so that your message doesn't get buried under a mountain of, oh my gosh, what is this? What's going on in this guy's head? And it gave us an opportunity and I didn't think of it at the time until literally when we had this follow-up conversation recently, like, this is a way in which as Christians we can really differentiate ourselves from the world
massive
just by showing, like, what I think of as a basic decent level of kindness. Is just saying, okay, this squares, this doesn't square. Gosh, that's a pretty heavy accusation to make. And rather than just jumping in on it and being both feet in on whatever end so you can participate in the way that we communicate nowadays, remember that we're talking to humans.
We're made in the image of God
in that way.
All of them are. And, it's funny with that. I wrote about it and posted on LinkedIn this weekend, but earlier this last week, or in the middle of the week, my kids and I were talking about, we were watching some of the stuff that was going on in the news, and they said, so who are the good guys and who are the bad guys? And we ended up having a really open discussion about the fact that, like, there aren't good guys and bad guys. There are broken, complex people who tragically have a really bad habit of making self-serving decisions, and we're all guilty of it. Mm-hmm. And I just think of, some of the stories just through some of the things I've read, and even just what we see in the Bible, where you see, like, man, I mean, some of the heroes of the faith, they do like horrible things. Right. And then they also do incredible things. And we all have that capability inside of us. And I think sometimes we forget that I don't want to be judged by my worst moment. And there's definitely plenty of things that somebody could go, yeah, well, Christopher did that. So if he's capable of that, then da-da-da-da-da-da. And it's like, well, true, but I'm also capable of not doing that. Right. And taking the time to understand. And I think sometimes we're afraid that if we take the time to understand, it means we also have to absolve accountability, which is not the case.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was, it's also reminding me of like a youth trip, like a fall retreat. And I can't remember the exact context of it, but the question was asked essentially, but what if they're a good Christian? And that was asked in a large setting. And then when we had our breakout time just for us as a smaller group, I posed the question, what does that even mean to be a good Christian? Because that's elusive. One, if you really want to go hard theology and throw a brick at someone, only God is good. There is no such thing as a good Christian.
Not even one, as the Psalms say
it. So then you say, all right, well, then let's back that off and say, okay, what is a better Christian by comparison? Like, what is a relatively good Christian? And and it's like, okay, but if we're already saying not perfect versus not perfect, who gets to throw stones and say, well, I'm the better Christian, or this person's the better Christian, You see Paul constantly saying the opposite of "I'm the better Christian." He's
I'm the
playing who's the
worst
worst.
of sinners.
Who's the worst? By the way, it's me.
It's
I'm the
me.
worst.
I'm the worst
But I am also the most credentialed. I'm the most credentialed,
and the worst.
but I'm the worst. You know? And um, and it's just, sorry, I got in a little bit of a verbal loop there, and I lost track of my thought. But it's like, it's that humility. Hey, another fruit of the spirit, and kindness, and just being willing to like investigate, or let people who are in a position to investigate do the investigation, and then say, okay, what did you learn?
Right.
And because it's the moment we start taking anything from any sources, this is definitively true, because like you said, it's already on the internet. Surely someone looked into this before it got posted. It got through some sort of gate. Like, there's almost zero gatekeepers
Well,
anymore.
and I think that's just, again, one of the cultural changes. By the way, it's taking it. It took me everything. And when you said humility, you're like, one of the fruit of the spirit. I was like, wait, no, it's not.
Yeah, I know.
but to your point on the gatekeepers piece, I think, again, it's a cultural shift where we forget that it's like there may not be gatekeepers, and
Right.
absolving our responsibility and saying, well, somebody else must have done fact checking. Somebody else must have vetted to make sure this is true before they shared it. We actually can't trust that because of how ubiquitous information is and how easy it is to create. And honestly, sometimes how hard it is to even track down the source, because stuff gets recycled and
Oh, yeah.
reshared and all this other stuff. And you're like, by the time you actually dig into it, most people honestly are reacting to headlines, not even what's the content of the article. I came across one the other day where if you read the article, it actually contradicted the headline, which I found extremely entertaining, to be like, wait, so if you read the headline, you might be mad about that. But then if you read the article, you'd be like, oh, actually, that's not even accurate.
Yeah. Yeah, I've had that happen more than once. I really wish I could remember the example, but I was upset because I had been bamboozled by a headline. I like read the whole thing. I'm like, that, but that's not what you end up saying in the
Right.
text. And just for anyone who needs some peace of mind, the reason and this is something I do all the time, I lump humility in with the fruit of the spirit, and I'm convinced that it's because that after the list of things, no laws against those things, it says, let us not become conceited, provoking one another, envying one another.
Yes.
And I think that's why it is. I'm like, I know there's a reason why I keep doing this all the time. So I thought I'd just go look it up.
I could tell when I said something, I'm like, oh, he's going to look it up now. Because I knew I knew there was a reason behind it. And again, the humility piece, honestly, though, to your point, I mean, I think sometimes even when you really think about some of the reactions we have to this stuff, it really does come from a lack of humility, of being like, you know what? I actually don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I actually don't know. All I'm doing is seeing something and reacting. And maybe if I had a more humble posture to go, maybe I should take a little time to slow down and look into this, because I probably am not as quick and sharp and have all the facts as I think I do. And maybe I am being emotionally hijacked by something. And, maybe I should just go do a little look into this before I freak out.
Yeah. Well, you remember last year, right? When you said a thing on a call and I didn't ask any follow-up questions, I just got mad.
Yeah. Well, we talked about it. And I think that goes back to where, the wisdom of Matthew 18, which I hate the fact that gets boxed into this thing of, oh, that's for church discipline. And it's like, no, that is a practical way that the Bible outlines us. And granted, some of this stuff is like bigger media, which I do want to talk about that. But some of the stuff we're talking about is just that, like, individual. Something happens to somebody you actually know, somebody offends you, And again, it might be related to something you saw them share and you react to it because you're like, that person thinks that. Oh, I can't stand them. And instead of going, well, I wonder what in that article they actually were thinking, or I wonder if they considered how that came across. Maybe I should go sit down and have a conversation with them and say, hey, saw this, kind of rubbed me the wrong way. Just kind of wondering, like, where was your head at with that? Because I just want to understand, kind of like what you described with the person in your church who then said, the fact you just asked questions and listened was a kindness that obviously stuck.
Yeah. Because I'm trying to find, and I'm searching, I think, in the wrong translation for how I have it memorized. But yeah, you have the Matthew that gets boxed into church discipline, but you also have the before you partake of communion, if you have anything against your
It's in the
brother,
Sermon on the Mount.
go to that person.
Yeah. Matthew 5, where it literally talks about if there's anything between you and another brother, before you take your offering, set it down and go to them.
Oh yeah, it's the offering. And then whenever you stand praying, this one's in Mark. Whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, so that your Father in heaven will also forgive you of your wrongdoing. Just like so that one is pretty easily boxed into discipline. And I've heard a lot of people that I very much respect as teachers do that and say, well, because even at our church, we use it informally as a model where if someone says to an elder or even our lead pastor, hey, this other pastor, I don't like what they're doing here in this ministry. Like, well, have you talked to them?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, but you're their leader. Like, no, like talk to them first.
Yeah.
If you find them to be completely unreceptive and for no good reason and belligerent, then go to their leader. And if that leader is belligerent about it, then come to the elder board. We're not here to run other people's ministries for them, just because someone is upset, right? And just saying no isn't belligerence, by the way. But yeah, that idea that gets boxed in there, but there's plenty of other examples that run parallel with it that indicate that we should be concerned with our face-to-face, person-to-person relationships outside of the context of church discipline,
exactly,
and elders being involved, and because of that passage, I do take it as informative for beyond that, because it's an even more it's a more structured picture of like, okay, so what if I do go to my brother and try to forgive, or what if I do go and try to reconcile and they say no, not having it? Like, what's your recourse? Well, we have this model over here.
Right.
That's
you
a
go
little
find
bit more
a trusted person to bring along to try and help
some insight. Yeah.
Work it out. And if ultimately it just goes out of control, then at some point you have to say, okay, then the relationship has to take a pause.
Right. Yeah.
And that's okay.
And we're only, and so many people are so, more and more, with the social media, like very non-confrontational unless it's anonymous. Like people you don't know, people it's just the internet. I'll be confrontational with them all day and night.
Yeah.
And
I'll let my thumbs like take it out on somebody I disagree with, but if I actually encountered them in person.
Oh yeah. And then you have somebody like they'll just launch into some sort of tirade, and then the next response will be like, oh, loving, compassionate child of God, you say, and you go look at their profile and that's what it says. Loving, compassionate child of God. And yet there's like a paragraph of pure vitriol that they just posted. And and then you're playing ping pong with, point counterpoint about a person's character, and you have never met them.
You haven't ever spent any time with them.
Like, you have no idea. And that's where, we have our favorite outlets to kind of go big, because I think that's the question. And how do you take this, like, clear direction about how do we interact person to person and blow it up to larger scale? Like, this big media stuff that
Yeah.
you talk about. And for me, and I know this isn't a probably a universal approach that works for a lot of people, and there's probably times when it's still not good. But a lot of it's like, I don't know that person. I don't have access to them. I got nothing. I have no idea. I don't know what they ate for breakfast this morning. Well, that's a bad example. I don't know what my family ate for breakfast this morning. You know, but it's like at a certain point, I feel like I gotta just not worry about it.
Well,
Like,
and I honestly, not saying it's a universal answer, but for some of this big stuff, I really do feel like, as Christians especially, where eyes are on us by people
yeah,
a lot, and they're going, well, how are these Christians going to respond? You know what? Sometimes just shut up. Like, you don't need to say anything. You
yeah,
don't, like you said, you don't know the person, you don't know the situation, you don't know the details of it, you're
yeah,
not close enough to it. And so to post about it, not saying never do it. I mean, there's lots
right,
of stuff I post about. I mean, I have a whole podcast where I'm dedicated to talking about what's going on, and I don't necessarily work in and out with all this stuff. So it's not like just keep quiet all the time. But I feel like there's a lot of times where when you look at stuff, it's like, you know what? Inside thought.
yeah,
Maybe just take that thought captive
yeah,
and run it through a few filters first. Run it through those biblical filters first. You know, where is this coming from in your heart? And then
yeah,
if you get to the end and you're like, I still have something thoughtful or engaging or that I want to
yeah,
engage in dialogue with, okay, fine.
yeah, yeah.
But
Because yeah, taking the time to think things through, like you said, bring it in, pass it through some filters. Maybe those filters are trusted people. Um, you know, and really think about why you're thinking what you're thinking.
yeah,
Because I think that's something that's missed a lot of times. Um, but I think some of it comes back around to the old adage to keep silent and have people think you're a fool, then better than
better
opening
to
your mouth
open your
and
mouth
proving
and
them
remove
right.
all doubt.
Yeah. um, and because then that's when you get into the whole like fear of retracting statements, like, oh, I was wrong. Like, more often than not, a post will get edited or deleted or something, but there's no apology. There's no
No,
direct indication of this. I was wrong. This was wrong and then we expect that, um, even though we were quick to jump on this person for whatever and not give any time or grace or opportunity, we just go, oh, maybe if we just bury it, no one will know and no one will
I
hold
know.
us accountable.
Well, and I feel like that because we've all done it. I mean, I'm guilty
Yeah.
of it. There have been times over the years something has just invoked something in me, and like I'm quick. I'm not taking the biblical wisdom of
Did
be
it grind your
slow
gears?
to yeah no, but like quick to listen, slow to speak, slow
Mhm.
to anger. Like I don't,
Yeah.
and I have really worked to try and be like, if that happens, rather than trying to bury it, owning it.
Yeah.
Like actually taking responsibility for correcting it or going, you know what, I'm actually going to leave this and maybe even comment underneath it and say,
Mhm.
hey, I was off on this. Because honestly, I think about that poor principal who just
Mhm.
got completely, and then the whole thing comes back as fake. There's no, board meetings being held to exonerate him. There's no parents showing up at his house going, you know what, like my kids are the one who threw the brick through your window. We're really sorry. You didn't do it. And we should have never done, like, nobody's doing that. And that's the really tragic part is people get really hurt from this stuff. And I think that's another opportunity we have as Christians when we make the mistakes, because we will, but to actually own it when we do.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's just so hard to do.
It's so hard to do.
Especially especially when, and again, like if you don't extend grace, you don't tend to expect it all the time either, because you expect people to behave like you behave in many
Right.
ways. It's like it's the inverse of the golden rule about treating other people like you'd like to be treated. You go, oh shoot, I just did that. That's just gonna, if
Right.
people are
I
gonna
can't
treat me that way
retract my
too.
statement because I know how I would respond to somebody who did
Yeah,
that. So I'm not going to do it, knowing full well that people will probably respond the same.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just, again, it's a way that Christians can really differentiate themselves, and not by being flashy, not
No.
by, you know, marketing differently or anything. It's just by behaving the way we're told to behave in scripture. Like if you have the spirit dwelling and alive within you, this is how you respond to the world.
Right.
You do these things. And um and all of those like exist in community. That was something that Becca had actually observed, my wife, um, is, when we're looking at the fruit of the spirit, um, love has an object, joy typically has an object. It's, if you're happy, you want to bring other people in. You experience peace with others, patience with others, kindness towards others, goodness with others. Faithfulness is something that you exercise in
Right.
community.
I mean,
All
gentleness is like right there.
Yeah. And it's just like, it's all of these things exist in community. And where we have a world where, as we've talked about, technology is easily a wedge. It's either directly a wedge or it's an escape. If you don't want to interact with people, technology gives you the ability to not do that and still get what you need out of life.
Yep.
It's incredibly isolating on its own. And so by being persistent in being a community, creating communities, and then exercising positive virtues in communities, which means probably getting off of some of our soapboxes, which means
Yeah.
asking more questions than we make statements. It means, acting in humility in a lot of these situations, reserving judgment while still exercising judgment,
Yeah.
and discernment. It's not. I guess my point is, it isn't rocket science.
No.
It's what we should already be doing, which is, because all the problems are the same types of problems,
They're the same
a
problems.
lot of the solutions are the same types of solution.
But I think the thing with it, and this is where for Christians today, I think we just have to be so much more careful with it,
Yeah.
is the technology we have is exacerbating these vulnerabilities in us at a level that we
Yeah.
have never experienced. I mean, you think 50 years ago, you really didn't know what was going on outside of the circle you interacted with
Right.
locally, other than maybe what you saw on ABC News or what. But really, even then, you kind of watched it and were like, okay, what, it doesn't really have the same kind of effect. Where now technology has so personalized it,
Mm-hmm.
so targeted it, so just exploited it, that you actually have to be so much more intentional on this stuff. But to your point,
Yeah.
the solution isn't rocket science. It's the same thing the Bible's been telling us to do since it was written. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, let the fruit of the Spirit come through you in
Yeah.
every action that you have.
Yeah.
I
And
think one of the other risks, though, one of the other ones, and I'm
yeah.
curious your take on this, is where I sometimes see people reacting to the kind of divisiveness of things and whatever. And their response is, I'm going to completely unplug and I'm going to become a peacekeeper. Like I'm never going to talk about difficult subjects. I'm going to just stay out of it. It's more of an avoidance, because I think we can swing the thing too far.
Yeah.
I think as a society right now, we swung way too hard on the other one. And it's like, everybody's a keyboard warrior. Everybody has to like pronounce judgment based on whatever thing they heard on Rumble or, type of a thing. And it's like, okay, back up. But I think what I'm concerned about is almost the adverse risk that we swing too far the other way and go back to this pacifism where it's just like, well, anything that's difficult, like, let's just avoid talking about it because it can be hard.
Yeah. Yeah. And like it's the classic difference between being a peacekeeper and a peacemaker, if you want to go that way. I know peacekeeping in and of itself, by definition, isn't always passive, but peacemaking never is. Right. Like there's an effort that's involved. And so, if you accept that peace doesn't just happen on its own, and peace is a valuable thing that should be pursued, disconnecting and just saying, okay, I'm off the internet, I'm off of socials, I'm off of all these things with the purpose of just not being disruptive or being part of the problem. In many ways, you may be creating peace for yourself in that space, but you're not necessarily creating peace for others.
No, and we're called to be a light to the world. I mean, that's exactly, you don't hide it under a bushel, no.
And I would say being disconnected
wow, you totally missed the reference.
I may have. My brain is on a train track right now. Try again later. Okay. If you say, okay, the place where I can make peace is not in social media, it's not here, and you choose to disconnect, and then you go and actively make peace in your community, like you show up in spaces and are, the voice of reason, you're asking questions, you're demonstrating behaviors live and in person, I think that's fine. And I know a lot of people who have made that decision. Just, I can't exist on social media for reasons X, Y, or Z. And I know like you have a limited social media presence for a variety of reasons. I have some platforms that I will not touch because I don't need to get sucked down more rabbit holes. But I'm
also super active on social media, right?
Yeah.
Like it's one of those like intentionality, like
right. Yeah.
I'm all over LinkedIn, but I'm not on Twitter and X.
You're on fewer platforms, but you're very present on those platforms. I'm on more platforms, but I'm not very present at all on any of them. I am your classic internet lurker, which sounds hyper creepy, but it's not like I'm stalking people. Wow, that sounded like exactly
I was like
a stalker would say. Maybe just delete that whole segment and just let's reset somewhere else.
Things a stalker would say. I don't stalk people. I just
not my best work. But it's like it's that activity of peacemaking, and because it's also you have that end where you can be like, well, I don't know how to exist in this space, but I know how to exist in this space. This space still exists. I'm going to do good work there. And I'll just pick on the way you phrased it. I don't think this is your intention, but it's easy then as a person who's a technology adopter to say, quitter. The world is in, the internet. It's there. You're disconnecting from a large portion of the world. What are you doing? On the other side, that person who left can have a viewpoint back to say, if you're still there, you're still part of the machine. You're part of the problem, kind of by definition. You're not connecting with people the way I am connecting with people. I'm going to community meetings. I'm weathering the PTO or PTA, depending on, where you're at and how they do those letters. And I don't think, and I've characterized it this way. I did it even earlier on this. I talk about technology and social media as being largely isolating and a way to divide people in practice. That's also mostly the way I've experienced it. And so that's the way I, talk about it. Whereas I know you use it for a lot of connection that you talk about, and I'm like, that's cool. You can meet people on the internet. I
Well,
wasn't
but I
aware
think
you
what
could
you're
use it
getting
for
at, and I
that.
think, and I think I'm glad you bring it up, because to be clear, I actually think this is where we as believers have to work with the Holy Spirit to figure out, where is it that you're calling us to be peacemakers.
Mhm.
And for me, it happens to work that having these big digital audiences and being able to create community and have foster really difficult discussions and do that on a massive scale, it works. I get, for some people, it doesn't work, and it actually is toxic to their soul, in which case it's like, good, then figure out where you can be that and get off of the platforms where you find yourself actually just creating more division. And I think
Right.
that's where, like, for you, I think it's awesome that it's like, you know what, I don't engage in a lot of this because I find it doesn't go well. It's just not my area of sweet spot. So it's like, good. And I think we need more people who can say, you know what, seems like the only time I use social media is just to go on a tirade about whatever's going on. And man, maybe
Yeah.
that's not the most productive thing for me to be doing. And maybe I should find a different channel where I can focus that attention.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're just in a really tough time. And I think this is where, on the technology side, there's just a lot of stuff hitting people. And I just don't, I think people, I mean, I don't know, I tend to be on the far end of technology adoption. So I'm not usually the best gauge of where the rest of society is.
Yeah.
But my observation is, it seems like people are getting hit with a lot. It's overwhelming. And as a result, we're making a lot of mistakes. And I think it's not great to the testimony of Christianity when some of the most hateful, divisive stuff you see on the internet is being put out there by proclaiming Christians.
Yeah. Yeah. No, absolutely. And I just, I figured, we had talked about wanting to bring scripture more in. And so I've been my phone, looking up some things
Yeah,
as
I
we've
know.
been going.
I know what you're doing.
And well, should I ever remember to post this video, people, so that they know, it'll happen. But just in terms of, this is coming out of the Vine Complete Expository Dictionary, the Old and New Testament. Anyways, looking up peacemaker, and when it talks about peace, how it's used, I just really liked some of these. Having not read this recently, harmonious relationships between men, between nations, friendliness, freedom from molestation, order in the state, in the churches, harmonized relationships between God and man, accomplished through the gospel, the sense of rest and contentment consequent thereon. Ooh, that's a fun word. And just the use of the God of peace as a title being used in Romans, Philippians, First Thessalonians, Hebrews, First Corinthians, Second Corinthians, corresponding to the Hebrew word shalom. And so when we talk about being, peacemakers, like, those are the things that we're meant to be making.
Yeah.
And, and all of those exist in some form of a relationship. And so you can say maybe you are personally at peace, just kind of going backwards up the rabbit hole from where I started. But all of these, in many ways, I mean, there's the idea of rest, and that's also important. But, the definition is really dominated by, human relationships
Yeah.
and a wholeness, of that relationship, that involves the gospel and God in a way that is beyond just not being in a state of argumentative
Yeah. Well, and
interaction.
I mean, even just that filter, you sharing that, I mean, I think running how we consume information and how we engage online and share information online, I think it's a really good gauge for how we should be approaching it. Because it's one of those things where we can, I mean, everything you just listed there, like we can be asking ourselves, is what I'm consuming contributing to me being more like this? Because if
Yeah.
it's not, then maybe I should look at it and go, I probably don't need this because it's actually making it more difficult for me to do this.
Mhm.
And then the same vein of, okay, if I'm engaging with someone online or if I'm sharing something online, is it for the purpose of accomplishing these things you just described?
Right.
And because there is a way to share difficult topics
Yeah.
in a way that's like peacemaker,
Right.
encouraging understanding of both sides, encouraging the complexity of it, encouraging discussion and dialogue between
Yeah.
people with different points of views. There's a way you can do it. It's not like the only way you can share difficult topics is by, blowing up the other side. It's like there's a way that you can do that. And I just think of a recent example where the video I shared about the risks of AI on adult media and
Mhm.
addiction. I mean, I got lit up by people, and I went back
Yeah.
and listened to it like 5 times. And I was like, I was so careful to not
Right.
be judgmental, to not be self-righteous, to just lean into but I got lit up. But it was amazing how many of those people I ended up reaching out to going, could we grab a virtual coffee? Like,
Yeah.
I'd love to talk to you because obviously something I said really hit a nerve with you, and that was
Yeah.
not my intent. And if you're game, I'd love to just chat. Now, granted, some are just internet trolls, and no, they don't want to.
Mhm.
But there were a handful of people who did, and we had some really good conversations. Some turned out we actually agreed more than we disagreed. Some we walked away and went, we definitely don't agree on this topic, but we can respect each other as human beings. And I
Yeah.
think that's one of those things where if we do more of that kind of stuff, I think we'd just be so much better off than where we are right now.
Yeah. Yeah. There was, and that reminds me, there was um, during some point during COVID, someone I know posted um, something I think on Facebook, essentially saying if you're not using this time to improve your health or your knowledge or something, then you're wasting your time. Like you're wasting an opportunity. And it's like, not, this isn't like time off for everybody right now. And, some people being kept at home means they're not being kept in a safe place, which is a huge negative for
Yeah, for
everything
a
that
lot
you're
of people.
saying should be happening. I I tried to have that conversation and um kind of what you did, I think, is also very good, adult education theory or education theory in general, which is, if you're the one putting out a message and someone receives the wrong thing, at least consider that maybe it was you who
Yeah, maybe you said it
convey it
wrong.
clearly. At least be open to that possibility. And this guy was not open to it at all. And even when I said the only thing, like the only gripe that I have is that you said, if this, then that, definitely. Like, if you
Yeah,
said, if this, then consider this,
sure.
that would have been hugely different to me. I mean, not everyone would grab it, but at least there was an attempt at graciousness and an understanding that not everybody's situation is like yours.
Yep.
Like, there's, there's such a spectrum of human experience. To be that definitive about it is just, you're already wrong with
It's
the
foolishness.
statement,
It's honestly foolishness.
and he just cut the conversation off.
Yeah.
Like, he wouldn't accept it. He kept arguing back. He wouldn't accept that he even might be wrong. And I offered, I finally did, and I should have done it sooner. I offered a conversation, but I don't know if it was just too late at that point or if he wouldn't have taken me up on it anyway. But no willingness to further engage. But I think about that a lot.
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
There's the
Sorry.
jackhammer.
Yeah, I was not ready for it. Um, but that's going to be coming through my microphone now for the rest of.
It's not too bad. It's actually not that loud. It's not
All
that
right.
loud.
I'll do this, like that'll help, and it's gonna, no, but man, that is so distracting though. But yeah, I think about that a lot, and just how, like, I don't ever not. I mean, and he's a great guy. I do very much like him, but it ended up on a list of things that I wanted to very carefully guard against.
Well, and what's interesting about what you just bring up that I think is good food for thought for believers in this time is twofold. One, to your point, that when you say something, if there's a visceral reaction to it, that like self-examination and that willingness to be open to listening to somebody who sees differently. Because again, I really do know a lot of people who they didn't intend to piss people off by what they did. It's just they didn't consider that people didn't see the world like they did, or that they were in a different situation, or things like that. And so I can see where that can happen. But I think, all right, we'll wrap up here in a sec. So I think one is, that self-examination, if you have that. But I think the other caution is it can be easy when you're posting in your echo chamber.
No, yeah.
And all you're hearing is how great everything is and everybody's rah-rahing on there. To me, that's just as indicative of self-reflection that I know I tend to, like, if I have a post that all everybody's doing is going like, yeah, I'm like, okay, I didn't intend for this to be like a bandwagon post. So did I misrepresent? Yeah. Am I overrepresenting? And people who think differently may not even feel comfortable coming in. Like, am I inviting different perspectives? And I think that's just as equal of a risk that we have to consider is, hey, just because what you're sharing people like and agree with, that's not necessarily a good litmus test of, okay, well, people liked it, so I think it's fine. Right. Like, maybe not. And I think, again, it's just that self-examination. Yeah. So, well, I know you've got a jackhammer distracting you now, and they're tearing up your patio, and we got all sorts of noise. So I think we're at a point where it makes sense to kind of come into a close on this. But I think with the shift in media, the way things are changing, and the speed at which technology is affecting this, I think this is just really helpful dialogue for Christians to be thinking through right now at a time when it doesn't take much. The bar is not that high. Being a decent human being and a kind, considerate human being can be a huge light to the world at a very dark time. So I enjoyed this, as I always do.
Yeah. No, that was a really good conversation. I appreciate it. And all right. Thank you for being accommodating to my... can't think anymore.
I know I threw you off a couple times throughout the episode today, so that's my bad. But I again enjoyed the conversation. Hope everyone who watches, listens, please let us know if there's additional things or thoughts. You can always email us on different topics. We would love to hear from folks. So thank you, and Joe, all the best with the deck renovations, and we will see you. We'll see you next week.
All right.